Hello YouTube, Goddard Radio Mosque here again with another beer review for you, as is usual. For this one we're going to go back to Bavaria and we're going to have a look at a brewery I've never reviewed anything from, never tried anything from this brewery either, so it should be really good. And this brewery comes to you from a little village called Sheyern, which I think is about 40 or 50 kilometres to the north of Munich. It's actually not far away from Reising, which is the home of Weihenstephan. It's in about 30 kilometres or so to the east of Augsburg as well, which is obviously, you might have heard of these guys because they're doing very well in Bundesliga this season. So we're going to have a little look today at the Klosterbrauerei Scheyern, and this is the Kloster Gold Hell beer. It's a little stuttering a little bit there. But as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll take you through a brief history of the brewery, and in this case the monastery as well. I'll put a little box here so you can click and just go forward to the tasting if that's what you're interested in. And as I always do, the link to my other videos from this brewery when they come is in the video description there, along with the brewery website. So go and check those out if you are interested, and have a look at my other beer reviews as well. So anyway, the founder of the Sheyern monastery is considered to be Countess Heziga, who was the widow of her second husband, Count Otto II of Sheyern. And apparently in the year 1076 she left the castle to live in a wooded area called Adelprecht, which is now known as Bayerischzell, and a short time later she was actually joined in 1080 by 12 monks after the Benedictine reforms, and at this point the monastery construction began. The old building is actually known as the Martinsmünster and is considered to be the oldest surviving building in Herzauer, Bavaria. And in 1104, Count Otto III of Sheyern actually began building a monastery on the Petersburg hill near Eisenhofen, Dachau, and the local church is apparently an outstanding example of Herzauer architecture, so if you're interested in touring about Germany, go and check it out. But by 1119, Otto V was calling himself the Count of Wittelsbach, and he actually abandoned his ancestral castle in the Sheyern, and this castle then became the home of the Benedictine monastery after the Benedictines from this St. Peter's Hill that I mentioned a minute ago moved into it. And apparently it was immediately subordinated to the papal chair to stop what they called worldly patronising. I'm not sure exactly what that means. But the monks constructed their church and monastery according to the Herzauer scheme, whose basic measurement is a unit square of 9.6 metres or 32 square feet, and you can still see this in many buildings in the town of Sheyern today. But when the monastery was built, it was actually aligned with the castle to the east, and the chapter church was built actually near the former burial ground of the castle chapel, in fact. But the engagement of King Stephen of Hungary and Princess Gezelia of Bavaria, who was the sister of Emperor Heinrich II, or Henry II, I'm not sure, took place in the monastery in the year 996 in the royal chapel, and this apparently is remembered in an inscription in the former castle chapel as well. But shortly after the founding of the monastery, they built their own church in honour of St. Martin in the area, and it's in the area of the present day parish cemetery, and this happened in 1144, and apparently this burnt down twice, once in 1171 and then once again in 1183. But Abbot Baldemar, whose leadership came during the reign of Count Conrad III, he brought the famous cross relic to the monastery from Dachau, and he presented the traditional plans for the affiliation with the St. John's Church to the monastery as well. But the monastery was actually consecrated in October 1215, and this was a three-nave Romanesque basilica without a crypt, but it had alternating columns as well. They talk a lot in their history about the architecture, but it was a little bit smaller than it currently is today. The building also apparently had a porch, and on the south side of this, Abbot Conrad, who was in power from 1206 to 1226, installed the so-called All Saints, but this was later known as the Dry Koningskapelle, and this was actually consecrated by Patriarch of Achela Wolfgar, and then following him, Abbot Heinrich, who was in from 1226 to 1259, he later added the St. Catherine's Chapel and Tower to the monastery, and during his time the monastery apparently excelled in design and illustrated books known as the Conrad books, and you can go and see these today in the Bavarian State Library in Munich. Following this, the Gothic building period began with Abbot John I of Tagernbach, and he was there from 1436 to 1449, and he increased the tower by one floor and also the addition of a new high altar Anschafte, which was built on the south side of the church after the removal of the right apse. And Abbot Georg I Spell, who was in from 1467 to 1489, he created a new vestry for the choir to the west of the monastery, and apparently this was called the St. John's Chapel. So as you're seeing already, this building has gone under many renovations, and there's lots of little different bits of it. It's quite hard to keep track of, in fact. But Abbot John III Hirschbeck, who was there from 1548 to 1558, he rebuilt the church chapter, and this was called John's Church, and he completed the vaulting of the cloisters as well in the monastery. monastery. But later, under Abbot Georg II Neubuck, who was there from 1558 to 1574, the church was extended by 7 metres so they could create a barrel vault for one of their primitive breweries, and they also modified the columns to give better application in the church as well. And this is quite interesting how they do this. But Georg also built the Elizabeth Chapel, which is still preserved in its original forms and is actually one of the oldest and last Gothic buildings in Bavaria. But under Abbot Benedict I Prumer, who was there from 1574 to 1610, the construction began of the Conventenbaus with the library, and it was completed under the supervision of Abbot Stefan Berger, who succeeded him from 1610 to 1634, and it is retained in this form today, although it was renovated in 1623 to appear in the Renaissance style with the addition of 2 side chapels. But Abbot Corbinian Reig, 1634 to 1658, he restored the damage from the 30 Years' War, and he created a new institution at the monastery church which was called the Johanniskapelle, which is apparently a rosary chapel, and this brotherhood here was founded in 1624. Now, Abbot Celestine Baumann, who was from 1693 to 1708, was apparently certified in Augsburg, and he carried out major works to the ceiling in the monastery, which is preserved since the Renaissance, and the tower was installed with a huge lantern, and this later became iconic for the monastery. But this happened in 1656 after a major lightning strike that caused quite bad damage to it. But major restorations of several of the buildings were carried out between 1738 and 1739, and a new library was also constructed under Abbot Placidus Forster, who was there from 1734 to 1757. His successor, Joachim Herfer, 1757 to 1771, prompted a huge renovation of the monastery in 1768 in the late Rococo style, which actually included the expansion of many of the windows and the addition of some of the oak-built stables that are quite typical of Germany. And there was also a new yard constructed, which was known as the Prielhof, in 1758. But the monastery was dissolved, as many of them were, after a result of the secularization policies of Napoleon. This happened in March 1803, and then the parish church of St. Martin was actually demolished in 1805, and then the monastery buildings changed hands many times between various different owners. But the monastery was re-established in the year 1837, but the year before this, King Ludwig I replaced the tower lantern with a Romanesque spire, and this is what remains on it to this day, I believe. But the next renovations to the monastery were drastic, and it was largely stripped down to create aisles and pillars of the same length, and the royal chapel was also renovated in this period as well. But the outbreak of the First World War prevented further plans, and Abbot Simon Landersdorfer, who was from 1922 to 1936, carried out a lot of restorative work on the monastery between 1923 and 1924. And in 1936 a new monastery cemetery was established under Abbot Franz Scheyer. And the final exterior renovation of the church took place in 1965 under Abbot John Hawke, and he was from 1961 to 1972, and it also occurred under his successor Bernard Lambert. But the interior was also renovated between 1974 and 1980, and apparently they've changed their choir designs to coincide with the 1500th birthday of St. Benedict, the 800 years of the Sheyern Cross and the 800 years of the Wittelbach as well. And the parish was apparently ascended to collegiate by Pope John Paul II in 1980. But throughout its time, the Sheyern Monastery has been well known for being involved in education, and it taught the local children about painting and literature and many other things. And they also hosted a humanities college in the 1970s called the Sheyern Gymnasium Oberpfaffenhofen. And today it's actually a state vocational high school, and that happened in 1976 that started. But the monastery is involved today in several trades such as bookbinding, tailoring, nursery, butchering, beekeeping, fish farming, and then electrical engineering, and also painting workshops as well, in addition to the brewery, of course, that they have near it, and you can see the bottle here. But they also participate in several institutions in academic research for environmental purposes, which is quite cool. It's quite cool to see religion and science kind of going together in that way, because it doesn't happen very often. But the monastery was actually never really a great monastery, but it has remained a Benedictine home for over 900 years, and it's had several notable achievements in theology and Christian art. So if you're into that sort of thing, go to Sheyern and have a little look. And Bavaria is very rich in that kind of history, if that's the sort of thing you want to go and see. But to tell you about the brewery itself, the brewery was founded in 2006 after a complete renovation of the brewery and restaurant to take it up to today's highest technical standards. The brewmaster apparently apparently is Tobias Huber, who is from Eichach, and he completed his master's schooling in Munich and was actually the valedictorian, or top of his class, however you want to describe it. And he also received the Bavarian State Prize as well. So as you can see, the Sheyern monks actually have a very capable young brewmaster, and he produces beer for the local area and the monastery restaurant, of course. To list the other beers you can get from the Klosterbrauerei Scheyern: you can get the Kloster Hell, which is this guy here. You get the Kloster Dunkel, Kloster Weissbier, the Hopfazupf beer, I think you would pronounce it, the Kloster Doppelbock, the Maibock, the Benedictus, the Christkindl beer, and the Sheyern Gold. So let's have a little taste of this guy and see how we get on here. I think when I looked at the website for the history of this one, they've changed their label slightly. I think this is the old label, but this is the Kloster Hell beer. So we'll get this guy open and get on with the tasting here. It's a 5.4% Helles beer. From what I read on some of the websites, it was rated as a Dortmund beer, so I expect this one to be quite a hoppy one. I'll just bring up the bottle actually, I forgot about that, to show you what it looks like. This is a picture of the monastery on the top of the bottle here, and it's actually quite nicely presented. I don't know why they changed their labels. In fact, I'm just getting a little hit of the light off the window there. I'll just put my hand over this side so you can see it a little bit better. I'm sure you can see the label better there if I just put my hand there, but it's quite nicely presented. There's the top label there, just to let you see the bottle cap as well. Quite nicely done, quite a classical looking one actually. I really don't know why they insisted on changing their labels, but I quite like these ones. But let's get this guy out and see how we get on. Getting quite a grassy, hoppy aroma from this one, which is what you expect from the kind of Dortmunder style Helles beers, if you like. So let's give it a quick swirl and see what we can get. It's a very, very fresh, grassy hop note that's coming off this guy. Quite floral, in fact. That floral character that it has is giving it just quite a nice little bit of freshness as well. But yeah, if I'm shaking it up, definitely mainly a kind of quite a grassy and citric and floral character coming out on the hops. A very sweet hop smell in beer. There is an underlying element of bread, but the really prominent thing definitely is the sort of aromatic and floral character from the hop part of the beer. As you can see, it's poured really nicely. It's crystal clear. If I put my fingers behind that, you can see them through the glass there. There's a lot of carbonation just coming up to the top there. It's got a nice frothy two-fingered head, so it's an ideal looking German beer. Just give it another smell and see what we think. Yeah, there's definitely an underlying sort of grainy character to the bread malt, but I think it's fair to say that the real prominent note in this guy definitely is the sort of grassy and citric hops. And that's got some good floral character to it as well. You need to smell it a couple of times to actually get the sort of bready aroma, I think. You take it in a bit deeper and you'll get that nice sort of sweet bready aroma coming out too, and there is, I think, just a little bit of maybe some cereal character in there as well. But let's give it a taste and see how we get on. It's actually really quite nice. It's got a lot more bread in it than the aroma would actually have you believe. There's a good hop bite to it as well, but there is a lot more. There is definitely a lot more of a bready character than the aroma kind of makes you think. But yeah, it's a really nice. It's a really nice beer. That bready malt base tastes like it maybe just has a little underlying of caramel, but it is more. It is more reminiscent of a kind of sweet bread. In fact, it's really reminiscent of one of these these nice white German loaves that you can get, the nice German breads. Really well done in the malt base, I would say. There is just a tiny little bit of a kind of cereal character to it, which gives it a nice little bit of complexity. But yeah, when you move into the hop side of the beer, you're getting a nice, really fresh, aromatic, grassy flavour out of it. The citrus in it isn't too prominent. It is a really kind of aromatic flavour of this one. It's a typical German kind of Helles beer. This one is a bit more reminiscent of a Munich Helles than a Dortmund Helles, I would say. This one, in my opinion, is more of a bready one, but it does have a good bit of hot bite to it as well. Maybe it's even a better way to describe it is it's somewhere in the middle of the two. You've got quite a nice prominent malt base at the start, and then it has that hoppy bite at the end. But maybe I think it does lean somewhere in the middle. It's got the best of both, so it is quite interesting in that regard. But yeah, the main flavour that's coming in the aftertaste is the kind of sweet, kind of cereal bready flavour, and you do have that nice grassy and aromatic freshness to it, or floral freshness just coming out all throughout it. It's a very, very fresh flavoured beer. I think it's very well done. It's very well balanced in terms of the flavour as well, and like I say, I really like the bread base on this one. But yeah, a nice really white bready sweet malt base, just a little bit of cereal character to it. Then you move into the sort of the really nice fresh and floral grassy hops there, and then the bready base comes out again just on the after part of the beer. It's really, really nicely done. It's very, very well balanced, I think. The hop character in it is a little bit short, but you do have that fresh feel to it. It's the bready malts that come out in the aftertaste, but the hoppy character kind of it doesn't last so long in the main part of the beer. You're getting a lot of bread, then it comes in and just dips down, and then you're getting the main bready flavours again. But you do have, on the very back of the tongue, you do have just this little bit of kind of floral and hoppy freshness. So it is really quite nice in that way, and it's very subtle, but it works very, very well. In terms of the mouthfeel of this beer, I think this is a more mid-bodied Helles. This is a little bit heavier than some of the ones I've tried before. It's not quite as crisp as some of the other ones I've had before either. The carbonation on it is a little bit more, I think it's a little tiny bit more aggressive. The body of it is just that little bit thicker, but it's really quite nice in that way too. I think they've kind of got this, in terms of the Helles beer, I think they definitely have got this kind of spot on. It does have a slight bit of dry character. It leaves a bit of slightly dry character on the front of the tongue, I would say. But it is actually quite a refreshing beer. It's not such a crisp one, I think. Like I say, the body is just a little bit heavier than some of the Helles beers I've had before. But some of the Helles beers that I've had have been a little bit thicker, but can still pull off the making themselves a little like crisp and refreshing. This guy is refreshing, but it's not quite got that kind of crisp character to it. But overall, it's a really, really nice Helles in my opinion. And if you get the chance to try it, I think it's really good and quite an interesting one. And like I say, it meets somewhere, the flavour of it meets somewhere in the middle of the Dortmund and the Munich Helles, which is always good. Both of these beers are very, very, they're a similar style, but they're quite different in certain regards as well. And this one kind of takes the best of both in my opinion. So if you want somewhere to start with a beer, if you've never tried German beer before and you have this guy as a choice, as a Helles beer, give it a go. You'll get somewhere in the middle, and then you can try a proper Munich Helles and then a proper Dortmund Helles, and you'll see what I mean with this guy. So it's a good one to start with in that way. And if this, as an introduction to the Klosterbrauerei Scheyern, I think this is a good way to go. Hopefully I can try some more of their beers and review those for you at a later date, but I head back to Scotland soon, unfortunately, so I'm not sure exactly when I'll be able to do that. But I hope you found my beer review informative, and like I say, this is a really interesting beer. Check out the brewery website, see what you think of it yourself, and let me know in the comment section if you do happen to have tried this guy yourself. But thanks again for watching my beer reviews. Please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Help my channel to grow. Give me suggestions for more beer to review. I'm always interested to hear your suggestions. But thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you soon with another beer review.